Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this very special conversation with Jan Dundar. My name is Sarah Clarke, and I lead the Europe and Central Asia team for Article 19, the Global Freedom of Expression and Information Organization. And we've been working on Turkey in particular over the last decade. And we've had the honor of working with Jan on many of his cases over the last number of years. Tonight's event is hosted by CEFTUS, which is an independent NGO based in London, whose mission is to foster bridges between the UK and Turkey, and they produce many reports and host events such as this on the current situation in Turkey. Tonight, Jan and I are going to have a discussion between ourselves about the current and historic challenges to human rights, looking in particular at freedom of expression in Turkey, where we've seen the real rise of illiberal democracy. Article 19 in our latest freedom of expression global report noted that Turkey is the strongest decliner in the last 10 years when it comes to freedom of expression. And this has had enormous ramifications for democracy in the country. Jan Dundar needs no introduction, but I'll just give a very small one. It's impossible to list all of his credentials and awards. Jan has worked as a journalist, an editor, and a documentary maker for the last 37 years. He was, of course, the editor-in-chief of Cumhuriyet, Turkey's oldest independent newspaper until 2016. In December of 2020, he was sentenced in absentia to 27 years in prison on espionage charges, which were widely condemned as politically motivated. Jan is currently a columnist for the German daily Die Zeit. He's a commentator for the German radio channel WDR. He founded the news website Uzguruz while in exile. Jan has been nominated as a candidate for the Nobel Peace Prize, and he's the writer of more than 40 books, one of which, We Are Arrested, was published recently. So there's really no better person to talk to about the erosion of human rights and freedom of expression than Jan Dundar. So Jan, thank you so much for joining us today.
I thank you so much to you, Sarah. Greetings to everybody from Berlin. I'm very happy to take part in this interesting event. And thank you so much, Sarah, for, let me introduce Sarah. She's really a very dear friend who always has been in solidarity with not only me, but many of the political prisoners in Turkey, together with my family. So it's an opportunity for me to thank her. And of course, thanks to Center for Turkish Studies, CEFTUS, for inviting us tonight.
Thank you, Jan. We have a large audience tonight. I just want to let you know that we are recording tonight's event. You can ask questions through the chat box. And we'll have a discussion first and then open it to questions from the audience. So welcome all again. So Jan, I wanted to start by sort of setting the scene. What CEFTUS asked us to talk about tonight is the erosion of human rights and democracy around the world, but particularly in Turkey. And you know, we've seen the rise of illiberal democracies all over the world, unfortunately, and this is something that Article 19 has focused on strongly over the last decade. We've seen strongmen autocrats take power in countries as diverse as Turkey, Russia, Hungary, Poland, Brazil, India, and of course in Trump's America. We've then seen these leaders proceed to dismantle civil liberties, silence critical voices, and suppress independent institutions. Turkey is, of course, of particular concern because we've seen an erosion in Turkey actually that's been swifter and more serious than anywhere else. The decline in the last 10 years has been truly extraordinary. And of course, in particular, since 2016, in the wake of the failed coup and the state of emergency that was declared thereafter. Jan, I sometimes think that your story and that of your family is like a very extreme example of the story of many individuals who have been detained and have been tried on bogus charges or forced into exile in Turkey. And I wonder if you could just take us through some of what happened to you after you published those stories in Cumhuriyet, and why it is that you in particular have posed such a challenge to an autocrat like Erdogan.
Thank you so much. And maybe I can give you some background about it because I've been working as a journalist, as you mentioned, more than, in fact, 37 is already a 40. I celebrated my 40th last year.
Congratulations.
So Turkey has never been a proper democracy. And during those 40 years, I've never breathed something like freedom of media. So during all my career, I was always faced with challenges by the governments, sometimes military governments, sometimes civilian governments. But to be honest, the conditions has never been so tough, and really the most difficult period of time for a journalist in Turkey. This 27 of this 40, I've been following Erdogan. Unfortunately, this is exactly my son's age. Unbelievable, a generation passed, and he's still in power. So what happened to me, in fact, I wrote something that Erdogan didn't like. But it was not the first one, to be honest. The first thing what happened between us was during the Gezi protest. He didn't like my coverage of the Gezi protests, and he asked my boss, the owner of my paper, then Milliyet, to fire me. And I was fired just after the Gezi protest in August 2013. And this guy, the owner of the paper, Demirören, clearly told me that Erdogan doesn't want you in this paper. So clear. And then he has become a media mogul in Turkey. And then I started in a TV channel as a presenter of the news show, and made a documentary on Erdogan's corruption case. Then, of course, he filed a suit against me, and then I joined Cumhuriyet and made another news serial about another corruption case of him, together with a Saudi businessman, to grab the most valuable land in Istanbul, etc. Of course, he didn't like it, and again, another lawsuit came, and then the famous MIT truck story. I was the editor-in-chief of the paper then, and we published a story about Turkish intelligence service smuggling arms to Syria, Islamist guerrillas in Syria, illegally. So the day after, to be honest, I remember very well the day, because I was in London then, together with my son. We were dining in an Indian restaurant, Khan, that we saw Erdogan so angry on live, talking live on a TV channel, saying that the person who made this story would pay a heavy price, and I would not let him go unpunished. So since then, I've been paying this price, to be honest.
And that has been an extremely heavy price for you. And
well, there are many people still in jail for more than 4 years, 5 years as journalists, and they've done nothing but just publish stories. even or tweet something or even retweet something. And this is, so I'm the lucky one that I'm still alive and free at the moment.
And continuing your work.
Yeah, yeah.
And John, in terms of understanding how Turkey came to this moment, how do you understand the factors in the country that enabled such an illiberal leader to take hold, and what has enabled him to stay in power for so long?
As you know, I mean, he's not alone. He's not the only case. First of all, the main factor is the global one. It's the climate of fear, I can say, that, I mean, during 90s, changed the shape of the world, especially after the downfall of the Berlin Wall. This fear, this uncertainty, this feeling of insecurity and instability, more than this, made people in need of strong leadership and authoritarian regimes, unfortunately. And they hide under their powerful leadership. And that gave leaders like Erdogan a big leverage to be more authoritarian, and they disregard and they don't care anymore about democracies, human rights, and press freedom. And in fact, the downfall of the Berlin Wall is followed by a huge refugee flow, as you know, and that's even made it bigger, made the fear bigger. And we were dreaming of an open society, and instead what we have is more powerful leaders, more higher walls and close borders around Europe. So Erdogan was kind of lucky because he was the one who were hosting the refugees in Turkey, and he made a deal with Europeans, you know, in 2016, and this dirty deal, thanks to this dirty deal, Europe agreed with him, and he promised to keep the refugees in Turkey, and in return what he had is the Europeans promise to keep a close eye to his authoritarian leadership. And since then, what we saw is really, I mean, European leadership is asking nothing but they don't want to annoy Erdogan, to be honest. And this huge attack over our democracies, our liberties, our freedoms, and so many people in jail. Turkey has become the biggest jail for journalists. But unfortunately, many leaders in Europe they don't care about this, and they really only seeking for their interests, but they're not defending they're not defending democracy and human rights, unfortunately.
Yes, and I think this goes to the heart of this issue of solidarity and the current moment of geopolitics. I know from our perspective and free expression and human rights organizations working on Turkey since, well, for many years, but in particular since 2016, we've seen, as John mentioned, the detention of hundreds of journalists, lawyers, human rights defenders, thousands of whom are on trial on spurious terrorism charges. And we even see Turkey disregarding and failing to implement the judgments from the highest court in Europe, the European Court of Human Rights, on extremely important cases like that of Osman Kavala, Selahattin Demirtas, where the courts have ruled that these one being the head of the Kurdish party in Turkish, another being a renowned philanthropist, that they should be released because they are being detained in violation of their rights to freedom of expression, and that they are detained on politically motivated charges. And yet Turkey continues not to implement these decisions. And I think something that we see is that they don't have any real price to pay, that the international community has not made it difficult enough for Erdogan. And John, thinking then, I suppose, about the internal context, we've seen some very closely run elections under very difficult circumstances in terms of electoral freedoms. We know that there is opposition within Turkey. How has Erdogan managed to last this long in the country?
It's a pure one-man regime. So he's been controlling almost every center of power in Turkey, every actor, including the parliament, the government, judiciary, media, army, police force, universities, academia, business circles. I mean, what else he needs, So he is the guy. And unfortunately, the opposition you mentioned are some of them in jail, as Demirtas, Selahattin Demirtas, the second biggest party in the parliament. The leaders of the second biggest party in the parliament has been in jail for more than 4 years now. Unbelievable. And their mayors are all in jail, and some of the parliamentarians are in jail as well. So how can we talk about a proper democracy without opposition? And of course, he's been controlling the media. That's why media is being functioning as a propaganda machinery. And his social media, we has to cope with a huge troll army, and we are under threat. And now it comes to the universities, and he's now appointing presidents to the most precious universities of Turkey. Presidents as partisan presidents, and he really smashed the opposition. And for the last almost 20 years, the opposition has never been powerful to challenge him. And of course, under these circumstances, with the backing of the Western leaders, he doesn't feel any threat to his power. And but at the same time, of course, he's clever enough to run the country, and he was lucky, he was clever and powerful. And the refugee flow helped him a lot, and Trump administration, of course, was a big luck for him. He used the opportunities of using Russia against the United States and vice versa, and this balance of power helped him to stay in power. And so far, so good, really. I mean, that's why he was the longest president of Turkish history, longest running.
That balance of power is shifting now, we hope, with
finally, I guess. Now we are a bit more hopeful, because Sarah, as you know, history kind of pendulum, right? How do you call it?
Repeats itself?
Pendulum, yeah?
It's a pendulum, yes.
The pendulum, yeah. So imagine, in 2013, we were so hopeful in Gezi Park protests. We were thinking that we are coming to the end of it. And in the Arab world, there was an Arab Spring uprisal. And in the United States, we were talking about in New York, the
Occupy
Wall Street, etc. Yeah. So it was like a wind of democracy and freedom. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden, what we had is a Trump administration in the US and dictatorships in the Arabian states. and more state of emergency in Turkey. So almost a decade now, we've been facing with those challenges. And now I guess the swing started towards the other end, towards democracy, because of many reasons. People fed up with it, and this insecurity has kind of settled up. And with the Biden election, I guess the things will change in Europe, beginning from the US, of course, and it will come to Europe, and the policies will change, not dramatically in the beginning, but most probably it will change beat by beat. And we can understand it from Erdogan's positions nowadays. He's been waiting for a call for the last 2 months now that he couldn't get. And we can understand that he's really kind of cornered, and because he lost the backing of Putin, and he lost a big friend in White House. And in Europe, the conditions will not be the same without Merkel, for example. And he was running the country, creating troubles, international crisis. So that was helping him to stay in power. Whenever he lost power, he was, declaring a kind of new crisis against in Mediterranean Sea, in Aegean Sea, against Greece, or in Cyprus, whatever, in Libya, Syria. So together with those troubles, it was, making easier for him to run the country. And he was clever enough to stabilize it afterwards. But then now it won't work, I'm afraid, for him. I'm glad for my country. And now, and for the first time after the elections, local elections, he lost the big cities as Istanbul and Ankara in Turkey. Then we realized that if the opposition parties came together, they can cope with it. And now we have an alliance against him in the opposition. That would be helpful, hopefully.
Yeah, and Can, so these are some of the possible openings that we're seeing. I wanted to talk a little bit about the work that you have been doing, you and many others, you since going into exile in, well, 4.5 years ago.
Yeah.
So, we wanted to talk tonight a little bit about solidarity, and I know over the years, while there's been a great lack, at times there's been a great lack of solidarity between nations and between the West and Turkey's democrats. There have been other types of solidarity, and I think you've been a master at finding different ways of fighting back through theatre, through your work, through the media. Can you talk a little bit about the types of challenges and ways in which you and many others have continued to challenge this regime, both in the country and in exile?
I guess after so many years, Western leadership will now understand what kind of a leader we are dealing with and what kind of a regime we are fighting for. It took so many years, even decades, to explain this. It shouldn't have been so difficult, but their interest, unfortunately, was so powerful that they didn't want to hear for so many years. So that's why I try to explain the conditions as I'm free here, considerably free in Europe. When I came here, I decided to give a voice to the voiceless, and because, really there's a huge cloud of fear over the country, and people are really scared to say something. And that gave us a responsibility, a duty to talk in the name of them. And I try to explain using every way, so using every avenue to explain ourselves. So including a play in England, as you were there. So we explain the conditions in jail, and I'm writing, trying to explain, and we've found a radio station here, as you mentioned in the beginning. So I'm writing for German media and trying to reach my audience via social media in Turkey. Not so easy, but necessary. And nowadays, we are working as a huge brain drain started from Turkey towards Europe, and many academics starts coming from Turkey to Europe. We start thinking of a kind of think tank nowadays, Sarah, because I've been reading a lot about the memories of German academics came during 30s from escaping from Hitler regime to Turkey. And look, after 80 years now, it's just the other way around now. And when I read about their memories, I really surprised that, for example, they were thinking of running a radio station from Turkey towards Germany.
Amazing.
Isn't that amazing? And they were trying to find out ways to, create an impact over the German society, but it was almost impossible during 30s. But what they have done was they came together, worked together to find out a way out, and wrote down some policies for after Hitler era, and a kind of roadmap. And as I understand that nowadays that we need this roadmap for post Erdogan era. So we will have a ruin after him, and we will have to produce policies to create the new Turkey. And now we have a unique opportunity with those academics, young academics, mostly Democrats and really freedom fighters. And nowadays we are working on this, and I'm sure among our listeners there are many of them, and I hope we'll be working together to get our country back from this darkness.
Yes, and I hope so, because the level of talent, as you said, of those academics and journalists and others who have been driven into exile from Turkey is enormous, and it's global. We have so many colleagues who are in the US, who are across Europe and elsewhere, and who are determined to build the next Turkey that does respect the rule of law and democratic institutions. I wanted to ask you, just coming back to your play, We Are Arrested. I think something that was really so important about that play was the response from around the world was that this could have happened in so many countries, that your story, while unique to you and to many of us, that this is the story of Turkey over the last 4 or 5 years. In many other countries, they saw this as a story that could have happened to journalists there. And I wanted to ask you a little bit more about maybe the response to that play and to some of your other work globally.
As you know, I mean, when Royal Shakespeare Company decided to play this, it was a huge surprise for me, and we worked together. Then I realized that it's not only my story, as you said. So I joined the team during the rehearsals, and observe their reactions, because they even, some of them didn't imagine how a journalist can be prisoned because of a news story. But it's true in our countries, and now they understand better, I guess. For example, American journalists understood us better after Trump administration. So democracy is something very fragile, and you haven't to, to taken it for granted, and all of a sudden they found it in their home. So that's why it was important. That's why it's kind of symbolic. And nowadays I'm working on a different, a similar project in Berlin. Maybe I can just mention this because it will be a surprise. We haven't mentioned it yet, but on the 25th of February, if somehow you are in Berlin, you can visit my cell in Gorki Theater in Berlin. We recreated the prison cell as a symbolic thing of from the biggest prison for journalists in the world, that would enable people to physically visit a prison cell and to see the conditions where the journalists were put. And so many people like artists, writers, journalists, lawyers, politicians in a slavery cell. So slavery has become the most famous place in Turkey, unfortunately. So most of us stayed there, and then I decided to open a kind of museum while it's still there. And together with it, we'll make an exhibition together with the cell. So I don't want people to, feel sad about them, because in the exhibition we will exhibit what kind of miracles they created in this small cell. So the name was Small Things Museum. So you will see how they communicate with each other in the middle of nowhere and without any means of communication, how they write their novels and poems, how they create music, how they made paintings, etc. So it will be a kind of showing the power of resistance and creativity. So hopefully after this exhibition in Berlin, I will put it on a truck. I love this truck story. So, so I will put my cell in a truck and go to a tour all around Europe and to show the conditions in Turkey.
Yeah, because we've seen really amazing works of art come out of those artists who've been detained in Turkey.
Exactly.
We have Ahmet Altan's novel, I Will Never See the World Again, Zara Doğan's amazing paintings that Banksy used and projected in New York. And I think in some ways, that's really where we've seen the most solidarity is in terms of artistic solidarity and the solidarity that you mentioned just now of journalists from around the world and others realizing how close that threat of illiberalism is. And I think, this recurring sentence that we've heard a lot, that it could never happen here. I think there's been a real awakening over the last 4 or 5 years that it can happen anywhere.
Mostly thanks to Trump,
Yeah. And would you say in that sense that, more people understand the situation in Turkey now?
Yeah, I presume so. And it's not only my feeling, but all the public opinion polls show that Erdogan is losing his power, and together with his party, and the opposition is getting stronger day by day. And so the problem will be he will leave in the end, but how and when?
And
Uh,
that's actually one of the first questions that came in from the audience.
oh
Was
yeah,
what
okay.
what do you see as what will it take for him to go?
Really, very difficult question. What do you think?
I think the economy is tanking. I think the devaluation of the currency is a huge issue that we can't ignore, and maybe for some people who felt a certain comfort or a certain security in the economy previously and supported Erdogan for that reason, I think he may be losing a lot of support there.
The problem is the earliest election is 2 years ahead, so 2023. So another 2 years. I really don't think that we can wait for another 2 years. But nobody knows the answer. How can we convince or push him for an early election? And what would be the conditions to, for him to agree on an early election that he may know, of course, that he may lose? Then we need something else or more. So that would be, as you mentioned, the economy. In fact, already so horrible conditions people living in. But just yesterday, he had a surprise for Turkish society that the Turkey will be going to moon soon.
So that
In 2 years. So everybody is just forget about the economy and poverty, etc. Now we have a target that we will have to go to moon. And in fact, we can't go to another, to a shop in our streets, but we at least we have a dream of going to moon. So he's selling dreams, and it works so far very well. But from now on, I mean, it's just a joke, and many people, of course, just laughing. But we don't have the means to react, to show our reaction. And anyone who dares to go to streets, there's a huge army of police, and this police state, a kind of really a kind of police state, and every kind of opposition is smashed right away. So if you don't have the means of uh, protest, if you don't have the media, if you don't have universities, if you don't have civil society and the parliament and the judiciary, so how can you resist such an unlawful government? That's the question now in front of us.
yeah, and the level, as you say, the level of state capture of the institutions and state ownership of the media or pro-government businesses ownership of the media is now so huge, and yet there still is protest. And there's a question here of what is your opinion of the current university protests over Boğaziçi? Do you think that is there a chance that they will reverse the order to appoint a pro-government rector? What do you think of the?
Well, I'm really optimistic. I always, trying to see the things in a positive way. So Boğaziçi was not the most politicized universities of Turkey, as, for example, Middle East Technical University. But all of a sudden, what we've been witnessing is a huge protest campaign by not only from from the students, but also the academics. So thanks to this move of the government, they came together and got the backing of the other universities and students. So there's a huge protest campaign against him. I don't think that he will withdraw. He will withdraw, but this this protests show that there's still a feeling of resistance among the students and among the country, the society. Now it comes to the necessity of creating an opposition alliance, to resist, to organize the resistance. The people's reactions are there. The resistance is there. The people are really suffering. And what we need is a strong opposition coming together and showing people, organized people, and showing people the way out, and push the government for an early election and organize those reactions. That's what will be the next step, I guess.
Thank you, John. Let's hope so. I have a question here about the UK, because this is obviously we're hosted by a UK CEFTUS today, and it's a question about, are you concerned about the UK's response to Turkey? Arms sales have continued, military training has continued, and despite there being more journalists in prison than anywhere else in the world, we've seen a very muted response from the UK. The UK is slightly different to the EU when it comes to the refugee deal. That's not their number one priority, but they do have other priorities. And I just wonder if you could comment a little bit about that in the UK-Turkey relationship.
I guess the last prime minister visited Turkey came just before the elections, and she said nothing about human rights issues or press freedom or rule of law or secularism. Only she talked about the arms sales. And that was really so disappointing for all of us to see a British prime minister really kind of escape talking about human rights issues. And it was just before the election, and Erdogan used it as a kind of support for himself. It's shameful. And she was not the only one, of course. German government is still the same. And German foreign minister just 2 weeks ago said that they are getting signals of normalization from Turkey. Can you imagine this? I mean, what is this? I mean, the country is burning, and what they are seeing is Turkey withdrawn their ships from Mediterranean and agreed to talk with Greece. So this is the normalization. And Erdogan is, capable of convincing them that everything is under control. So I guess the European governments, together with the British one, they agreed with the idea that, okay, he can do whatever he wants to his own people, but we should block him to do any damage to our continent or to UK. And Erdogan is kind of using it as a tactical thing. You know Mehteran, right? Mehteran is famous Ottoman band, and how they move, they march. When they march in a special day, they put 2 steps forward and stop, and then look around and 2 steps further more. So it's exactly what Erdogan has been doing in international relations. He's just trying to, find ways to create problems or troubles or crisis. And for example, sending ships to Mediterranean coast or declaring a kind of war against Greece, and waited for a while and sending some signals of normalization and start again. And that's the way he, convinced the opposition parties that we are in a war, so we have to come together, and then again. And unfortunately, it worked so well so far, but I don't think that it will work anymore.
It won't work forever. But no, he has been a master of pivoting each time.
Unfortunately.
And I think this discourse of normalization is something that we also see a lot with the Turkish Foreign Ministry and the Ministry of Justice, when they talk about a normalization of the rule of law in Turkey, and that there will be judicial reform, that there will be a return to respect for international law and for international decisions. But at the same time, no, please. But just at the same time, you know, we see that Turkey has the highest number of cases of decisions from the European Court. It's not complying in terms of releasing Demirtas or Kavala or the other or the other key cases, and so it's a double speak all the time between what they're presenting, and I think often what the EU or the Council of Europe, it's the language they want to hear, but it's very naive to believe that this is the case when all of the evidence is to the contrary.
Yeah, what I was talking about is the governmental level, but I mean, we are not divided as Turks and Brits, etc. So we are divided like Democrats and authoritarians, you know. So you and me on the same side, and put Erdogan and Trump in the same side. So division should be like this. So when it comes to this point, we have lots of friends in the UK supporting us, as yourself and your organization, and many human rights organizations really working very hard and thankfully on the issues in Turkey and standing by the freedom fighters in Turkey. But we need, for example, it shouldn't be only the human rights organizations, but we need the support of, for example, student unions, academics nowadays. You see, I mean, they are destroying an independent university in Turkey. So we should find ways to convince the British universities to support. And it should be the same for trade unions, for political parties, for youth organizations, women organizations. You know, we need all that kind of solidarity. We have to organize it. So that's what we are expecting from the Turkish origins or Kurdish origin people listening us, based in England. And, you know, if they want to do something, that would be really so important to, for example, convince Labour Party, for example, to get in touch with other parties. And why not, I mean, visiting Demirtas in jail as a commission from a party, from Labour Party. And it shouldn't be so difficult. But if, you know, if someone organized it, really that would be a very important signal from Europe, from UK, you know, that kind of signals we need to feel the solidarity.
Yeah, and I have a question here from a human rights lawyer who has done a lot of work in Turkey and is now banned, like many of other human rights lawyers, from entering Turkey to observe political trials. Do you have any advice for those of us who are, like you, unable?
Yeah, be in solidarity with Turkish lawyers. They are really brave and doing great work. And if they can, you know, work with them, they don't have to be there physically, but they can send messages, they can organize protests, and they can, you know, convince some parliamentarians to take part. They can't ban parliamentarians, for example, to go there. And why not attending some, you know, for some parliamentarians from UK Parliament to go and observe those
trials.
Yeah, trials, because I mean, they are politicians and they are parliamentarians at risk. And, you know, it will take too much time and effort for them to go there for a day or two and show solidarity.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we've seen the impact that those sort of international delegations
Exactly.
have. That I've been in many of those trials where
I
you do
know.
see that it can have an impact being in the court, and just knowing that these trials are being observed. I have another question which goes very much to your own experience. How can we help imprisoned writers and journalists? How can we help them to resist and to keep up their resilience against the depressing conditions of prison life?
Yeah, that's important. Well, most of them now in solitary confinement. So solitary confinement means the government wants you to feel lonely, all alone, and left alone, forgotten. So what you can do is to cope with this feeling is really tough after, I mean, 2 years, 10 years in prison. Can you imagine this? So, of course, first of all, reading their novels, poems, and then writing to them. That would be really very helpful because, I mean, getting letters from London, Ireland would be a big support for a writer in jail, in a cell. But more than this, of course, organize institutions like PEN, PEN International, PEN England, to be more active. Thanks God, they are really active on this.
Yes.
But to join them, to support, and without this international support, they won't get out, I'm afraid.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and exactly that. PEN has some brilliant projects that that anyone on the call, you can write letters to journalists in prison in Turkey and indeed across the world, and those letters are a lifeline. I understand to those.
Exactly.
Yeah. Just on media freedom, we have so many questions coming in, so I'm going to just keep asking them. We have a question asking you to talk more about how do you get your message, and how does the independent media continue to reach people in Turkey? Are people managing to follow what's really happening, given how much repression there is? And can you talk more about these independent media and opposition media?
Unfortunately, they are really cornered, and they're reporting under very heavy risks. And just this morning, I was watching a TV presenter saying that I'm not sure if I mentioned this word or this sentence, I could survive, because I mean, they're not worried about themselves only, but the TV channel. So we have a couple of TV channels left trying to give a kind of democratic, balanced voice. And the rest is, there's a huge pro-government media, and very aggressive, not effective, but aggressive. So you have to cope with it. And unfortunately, for example, a story like mine I published in 5 years ago is almost impossible to publish in Turkey anymore. So you have to cope with many risks, and you have to, you will have a lot of troubles if you want to even try to do something like this. And that's why now we have a new concept, media in exile. So we are trying to create a kind of alternative media here. So this is also part of the project that I was talking about, to create an alternative media here and try to give as much as voice as possible towards Turkey. And not only this, to think about the future of Turkish media, and to create a new people to study and work with new people here. But there are still really brave journalists trying to survive in Turkey, and thanks God, thanks to them, their efforts, people are trying to listen. And especially in the social media, Twitter is really so active here, and there's a high price for tweeting against the government and Erdogan. You will find the police in a couple of hours later after your tweet, but still you can see people, some of them hiding behind a different name or something. But nowadays it's on the agenda of the government to, to punish those media outlets like Twitter, YouTube, etc. So to block the last way of communication into democratic communication in Turkey. Yes. And that's really important. What will they do when it comes to fight against this aggressive government?
Yeah, no, and that's an area we've been working on a lot with other partners. There's a new social media law in Turkey, and it requires social media companies to appoint a local representative in the country. And Article 19 and others have been calling on, initially we were calling on social media companies to be very careful and to resist becoming the long arm of the Turkish state and complying with what we know will be enormous takedown requests and other concerns around their users' data and privacy. Now, many of the social media companies have complied. They have appointed representatives recently. Twitter still hasn't, but Facebook and YouTube and others have. Yeah. So we're urging those who are going in to be very clear about the red lines that they have, because they've said that they are both complying, but that they will uphold their community standards, they will protect the rights of users.
That we'll see, yeah.
Because I suppose something we know is oftentimes social media companies will use the example of, well, it's the same laws in Turkey, or it's the same conditions as Germany has, and we always point out, but look at the difference in the rule of law situation between Turkey and Germany. You're looking at a completely different context.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think
Sarah, that's so important. I mean, we need to convince them that their existence is so important, and they should be really resistant, and they should support the freedom of expression in Turkey. Otherwise, the trouble will be for them to choose between, complying the government's requirements, and that means sacrificing the freedom of expression. Otherwise, the other side of the coin their representatives will be in Silivri's cell,
exactly.
As an office, using their office there. So it's really difficult decision for them, I know, but we have to work together and stand by together to resist.
Absolutely, because they obviously they were facing an advertising ban if they didn't comply, and also that their bandwidth would be throttled, making them basically unusable. So we know that the pressure that's been put on them by the Turkish state is considerable, but we do see social media as one of the last bastions of resistance in the country, and so that's why it's so important to protect it, and for the companies to realize their commitments and uphold their commitments when it comes to freedom of expression. Jan, there's quite a lot of questions coming in about a proposed constitutional reform in Turkey. So in recent days, Erdogan is discussing and some constitutional change. Do you see any merit in this? What is his real intention behind his desire to change the constitution? What are your thoughts on this new constitution?
He is not changing the constitution, he's changing the agenda. So it was a constitution reform last week, and this week is gone, and we are talking about going to moon. So wait for it the next week. I don't think that he's planning something, but he needs to find out some reform-like steps to convince the Europeans not to put sanctions over Turkey. So they already, agreed on this, I guess. There's no problem among them. but still he needs to show some kind of reform-like steps to ease their position.
Yeah.
I don't think that this is something serious.
Yeah. It's another pivot or a distraction.
Yeah.
And you mentioned the issue there of sanctions. We've seen that there's some new sanctions against from the US. Do you see, there's been a few questions about, do you see, let's say, Magnitsky-style sanctions or otherwise as being effective in challenging the grip of Erdogan's regime?
Yeah, this is a very sensitive issue because, I mean, the sanctions, for example, didn't work in Iran. And I don't think that it would work in Turkey if the sanctions would target it in general, Turkey and the Turkish people. So that's why, for example, the American government targeted specific names in the government, and that may work then. Because, I mean, Erdogan is really clever enough to organize people's reaction and create anti-Western feelings using possible sanctions. So I don't think that it would work if Erdogan would succeed to put the issue like this, and it may help him to, create a more Islamist, anti-Western policies. And that's why they have to be very careful about this. And the target shouldn't be Turkey itself, but Erdogan and his government and the really responsible bureaucrats for, creating this unlawful government.
Yes, so I think this idea of very targeted, perhaps Magnitsky style sanctions,
exactly.
where we see very focused sanctions on the individual and their families who are responsible for clear and grave human rights abuses, and they have been. We're seeing some success in the use of those sanctions elsewhere. So, yes. So, Jan, then we have some other questions more looking at the safety of journalists regionally. So there's a question from the European Parliament. What more could be done regionally in terms of protecting the safety of journalists? You yourself were the target of an attempted assassination. You've obviously had to go into exile because of the high level of threats and that you would never have received a fair trial. But what more can be done at the European level to protect journalists in terms of their safety?
Well, erase the threat. So all our efforts is, towards to protecting journalists, but it should be the other way around. I mean, we should concentrate mainly on the threat itself, not the target. We are trying to protect the journalists, but you can't imagine the threats over us. I mean, I can't talk about myself here, but many of my colleagues in Turkey really under heavy risks, working under heavy risks. And imagine that one headline would be enough to put you in jail for years. So you have to think twice if you should write this word, use this word, or this headline, or put this picture, or draw this caricature, etc. It has a huge price. And it's not only putting them in jail, but I mean, Turkish cemeteries are full of journalists, brave journalists, as you know. So you may pay it with your life. Or, I mean, in my case, my family also pay the price. Not only you can be brave for yourself, but what about if they, attacked your family or, prevent them traveling or something? That's the price we have to pay. So I don't think that the journalists can be protected by, police force or by international solidarity. It wouldn't be helpful, unfortunately, but we should put more pressure on the government, and that's the only way to help journalists, because I mean they have a free hand to declare everyone as terrorists and helping terrorist organizations. And imagine a country with a population of terrorists, 25 million, something like, all voted against Erdogan, all terrorists and enemies. And this feeling of hatred destroyed the climate of free talk in the country. That's why it's not easy to protect the journalists without, putting pressure on Erdogan and his bureaucrats.
Yeah, and I think Turkey is a very stark example of where we see the state is really at the center of the threats that are facing journalists. When you see the number of journalists in jail, the number of journalists on criminal charges, the number of journalists on defamation charges relating to defaming Erdogan himself or insulting Turkishness, I think we see a huge number of issues with the laws as they relate to terrorism. They're so overly broad and vague that anybody, you or I, can very easily be can be convicted of terrorism. So there's a huge issue in terms of legal reform that's needed. But as you mentioned, without political will, because this is a global and regional issue, without the political will from the state to protect the journalists, there's very little else that can be done in its most important form. So I think what we see is particularly the issues of impunity for the killings of journalists that have happened already in Turkey, and the ongoing persecution by the state of journalists is the critical issue. There's a few more questions around the issue of journalists who have had to go into exile. So have you seen many countries accept Turkish journalists who've had to go into exile? Have they been given asylum? Have they been given protection?
Yeah, of course, we are together here. We are a huge family here. Journalists from Egypt, from Latin America, from Middle Eastern countries, from Syria. Unfortunately, we are getting bigger day by day, and we are sharing experiences, thinking about our future and our country's future altogether. And it's getting bigger, unfortunately. And of course, protection is another issue, because being away from your country doesn't necessarily mean that you are secure, because if you are challenging leaders like Erdogan or Sisi or Putin, nowhere is secure, as you know. So there's a long hand, as you said, long arm of them that you can feel. So you have to be very careful, even you are in exile.
Yes, and we've seen this as unfortunately, like you say, it's a global rising trend of transnational repression, either through the misuse of Interpol and serving red notices on journalists, or sending assassins to kill journalists in exile.
Kidnapping people in Turkey's hands, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So it doesn't stop even when you've reached exile and asylum.
No.
There's also a question here about funding. Are Turkish journalists outside of the country, are they getting support that they need? It must be difficult to set up initiatives like yours. What more can be done to support these sort of initiatives?
Yeah, very difficult indeed, because there are institutions who are ready to support, but in one way, of course, you have to be very careful, because it's easy for Turkish government to, that they can accuse you for being used by foreign capital or whatever. So, for example, getting money from Soros is kind of enough to be claimed as criminals or something. So that's why you can't get money from the governments, and uh, people are really scared to support from your own country to support you, and it's really tough. This conditions are really tough.
Mhm.
So what we do is we are doing crowdfunding and ask people to help us to, to stand still and uh, function well. And for example, for our radio, that would be great if they just support us where, with small contributions. That would be really great. So each contribution from them would, create a new program for our radio. And nowadays we are trying to organize the academics to make their own radio programs and start talking about the important issues on Turkey, like economy, like health, like women, like Kurdish issues, etc. So it's not easy to do it without the support, and that's why it would be really great if we can have more support from our listeners.
Mhm. Thank you, Can. Um, there's a lot of questions, again, just coming back to the global context. Do you see, there's one here about EU accession for Turkey. Is that completely over, or is there any hope?
Is there something like EU anymore? Can we talk about an EU? I guess it partly depends on the future of EU. We cannot see it yet. For Turkey, of course, we are getting away year by year from full membership dream. And it would take decades for Turkey to, be a proper democracy again. But on the other hand, it's partly depend on Turkey and Turkey's new regime after Erdogan. Will they be prepared? Shall we be prepared to uh, be more democratic and obeying the rule of law, and sticking to the European standards?
Mm.
And then, of course, it's an ideal, it's a dream for Turkish citizens for decades, of course. And unfortunately, this way is blocked by not only for Erdogan, but with Erdogan, but with many European leaders, block the way of Turkey towards Europe. And unfortunately, Turkey turned their face towards Russia and Middle East more in the last decade. But nowadays, the latest opinion polls show that there's still a sympathy uh, about Europe and Western culture in Turkey. So after 20 years of damage,
Mhm.
still the feelings about you being a European is, alive. And when I ask even to the supporters of Erdogan, nobody wants to go to Saudi Arabia or Qatar.
Right.
They just want to go to London or Paris, Berlin. So that's a sign that people really wants to be I don't know, but European in the European family.
Mhm.
So that's a big advantage for all of us. And I always think that a country with Muslim origin would have been great in the EU to, get rid of this polarization of West and East, Christian world against Muslims, etc. Turkey would have been really a great opportunity for the, for a healthy society, for a healthy institution like EU. but we missed this opportunity, and that's now we have a confrontation between Europeans and the others. But still, the opportunity is there.
It is.
And if Turkey would be ready to reform itself, and same with the EU is ready to embrace the others, then why not? I mean, in the coming decade, it can be a new Europe together with new Turkey.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that, you know, while it is frozen, I think everybody would agree that the accession process is frozen at this moment. It's not over. So as you say, if there could be a realignment, yeah, there's always that possibility. There's quite a few questions about Biden, about what are your hopes and expectations. Do you expect Biden to continue an American business as usual appeasement approach, or do you expect him to be tougher on Erdogan?
Yeah, there are huge expectations from Biden regime, and which I don't agree with, you know, because we shouldn't expect the whole American policy dramatically changed with Biden. But on the other hand, I really expect a change in Americans' foreign policy. So it wouldn't be so dramatic. It doesn't mean that everything will be changed, but there will be changes. Already observed. I mean, Turkish government is nowadays trying to be kind with the new regime and trying to create new relations, because I mean they know that Biden is really, I guess my personal feeling is he doesn't like leaders like Erdogan, and he's kind of he knows very well what's going on in Turkey. And you may know that we have a history in our family with Biden.
Yes.
When I was in jail, he came to Turkey and visited my family and talked to my wife and my son. And he showed solidarity with us. And that was a clear message to Erdogan regime at that time. And imagine that this guy is now the president of the United States. And of course, he knows very well what's going on in Turkey. So he will, I guess, adjust policies accordingly. And of course, United States have interest in Turkey, a lot of interest, but he can change something in the relations between the two countries. For example, he wouldn't allow Turkey to, you know, pressure on US using the Russian S-400s, and or, you know, and they will be in coordination with the European leadership. So that's another story, because Erdogan was using Europeans against the Americans and the vice versa with Trump. And he had good relations with White House during Trump regime. And now, as Biden said, we'll work together with the European leadership. And the European leaders said, yeah, we will be working together with Biden. That would be really very difficult for Erdogan to play with those kind of games. And as America is a big partner for Turkey economically, politically, he needs their support, and he needs to show some steps of democratization, I guess.
Yeah. So
it'll remain be under very pressure, heavy pressure by Washington.
Yes. So it's some cautious optimism.
Oh yeah. We should be cautious.
Yes, but optimistic.
But optimistic at the same
time. That's great. Thank you, John. John, there's just a few more questions on investigative journalism coming back. So given how difficult things are in Turkey for the media at the moment, but knowing that there's huge corruption in the country, how can investigative journalists continue their investigations in somewhere like Turkey?
There's a project in Europe called Forbidden Stories. You know this, yeah.
Yes,
so
yeah.
they have a website, and I really advise people to have a look at it. And it's a great opportunity for all of us. It's a very symbolic attempt to show solidarity with the journalists under pressure. So what they do is to follow up stories banned in their own countries. And it's an international group of journalists, not only the same journalists, but different journalists from each country, and coming together to follow up the story. And I'm so amazed by their productions, because they show not only the solidarity, but they show the journalist in jail, for example, that he or she is not alone. But at the same time, it's a message to the government who put them in jail, that if you are hiding a story by punishing a journalist, you made it more international and visible. So amazing. So nowadays we are working on a similar thing together with journalists from different continents, and I feel the solidarity, and really it's a big opportunity for us to deal with dictators.
Yeah, and I think that the work of Forbidden Stories and other global investigative journalist groups like ICIJ and OCCRP, we're seeing, an increased global investigative journalism network, which is in itself just one of the most effective forms of solidarity that we've seen, and also that Forbidden Stories takes forward the stories of those journalists who've been killed in the line of their reporting. So they're really, as you say, ones to watch.
Sarah, I'm getting out of battery. I need to recharge it if there are still more.
No, I think honestly that's sort of where we're just kind of coming to the close.
If I disappeared suddenly, be aware of it.
No, we just had a few more minutes, but I think
I should recharge it.
Those are like the most, the nearly all of the questions. So I think with that, Jan, I just wanted to say, and to all of the audience, to say a huge thank you for joining us tonight for a fascinating discussion on Turkey, human rights, democracy, and solidarity. It's always an honor to speak with you. And
honor is mine. You've been a great moderator, Sarah. Thank you so much to you.
Pleasure. And thank you to the audience, and thanks for so many excellent questions tonight. And thank you so much to CEFTUS for hosting us. So with that, we'll let you go, Jan, and thank you, everyone, and good night.
Oh, thank you, everyone, and CEFTUS, of course, for hosting us. It was a great pleasure to talking to you and with the audience. I couldn't see them, but I feel from the questions that their support. And thank you, CEFTUS, for standing by us all the way around. Thank you so much, Sarah.
Thank you, everybody.
All the best.
Good night.
Good night to everyone.